Is extraordinarily difficult to change the culture of an entire department of Maine state government. Randy Liberty has succeeded in doing that.
What's even more remarkable is that the agency he reshaped is the Maine Department of Corrections, which runs the state prison system and had a reputation for being resistant to change. There's a lot more to Randy Liberty's story than being Commissioner of Corrections, and he tells it all in his new memoir, Liberty's Prison. Randy Liberty begins his book with an unforgettable story. In December of 1971, as this photo shows, his mother took Randy and his brothers to the Maine State Prison for a Christmas party. The boys visited their father, who was serving time for a series of burglaries. Another inmate played Santa.
And I remember it very clearly. It was very industrial, very correctional, bars, slamming doors. And it was emotional. You know, it was difficult your father's not around and you visit him and it's celebratory, and then you have to leave. And so a lot of tears and difficult times.
You had a really tough childhood on a lot of levels. Part of it was your dad, who was in and out of prison and jail constantly.
That's right. Yeah, so he did a lot of time at the Somerset County Jail, Kennebec County Jail, a lot of burglaries, some arsons, theft, that sort of things. And as a result of his behavior, we lived in poverty. We were on free hot lunch, food stamps, fuel assistance in the winter. It was difficult. It was very difficult.
The book describes what it was like living for a while in a trailer. You and your three brothers and your mom. The pipes would freeze in the winter. You had no running water.
That's right. We lived in that mobile home, I think 9 years, until my sophomore year in high school. 2 bedrooms and 5 kids, and it was challenging. In fact, when we left, we sold the trailer for $1,000.
You literally would celebrate when spring would arrive because it meant that the pipes wouldn't be frozen anymore and you'd actually have running water.
That's right. I remember one April that my mother yelled out, "The water was running," and it was cause for celebration because when you don't have water, that means you have no laundry, you have no showers, you have no toilet. It's very, very difficult. We would, go next door and with jugs of, with empty milk jugs and get water from the neighbors. It was a tough time. There were constant worries about not having enough to eat. The family got by thanks to surplus food provided by the government. So the National Guard would arrive with a bus, and you'd get blocks of cheese, powdered milk, powdered eggs, and molasses and flour and all of that. And so at the end of the month, often, it'd be pretty scarce. Especially by the time that you were a teenager, you did not have a great male role model at home because your dad had been in and out of incarceration. One time when he was out, he was driving around. I think you write that he had a beer can between his legs. Clearly he'd been drinking, got into a crash, and he said to you, "Get me the onion." That's right. So he had he drank all the time, very frequently, and so he'd always drive with a beer between his legs and a cigarette going, and we got in an accident, and he yelled to me, "Get the onion." And he always kept an onion in the glove box. So when the police officers came, they couldn't smell the alcohol in his breath. So he literally ate the onion like an apple. Yeah, and law enforcement shows up, and they couldn't detect any alcohol in his breath. So one of his many tricks. A turning point for Randy Liberty came when one of his older brothers, a senior in high school, joined the Army. I went to visit him at Fort Devens, Mass., and he was a military policeman. He was in a cruiser, he was 18 years old. He had 3 hot meals and looked like a good life. Randy enlisted in the Army when he was a senior. He was proud of his uniform, proud of his service, and very happy to have the GI Bill pay for college at the University of Maine at Augusta, where he studied criminal justice. You went into law enforcement and worked at various agencies as a police officer, sheriff's deputy, chief deputy finally at Kennebec County, then got elected sheriff of Kennebec County. Did you like that work? I love law enforcement. I love being able to respond to a call. I love being able to help people when they're in crisis, whether it be, being burglarized or assaulted in some way, and it really fed my soul. I really enjoyed the work. At one point early in his career, Randy Liberty worked as a guard at the Somerset County Jail, where one of the inmates was his own father. So every morning I'd go to work and my father would be there and, "Good morning, Rand. Good morning, Dad. Good to see you." And in a very strange way, he trained me because at the time there was no training. So I'd literally say, "Dad, what do I do now?" And he would say, "It's time for count." And I'd say, what do I say? And he said, line up for count. So I'd say, line up for count. And, you know, as strange as that was, it was probably the best time we spent together. And he was always a fun guy. He just never recognized his duty to provide for his children. You know, he was always good to talk to. Oh, he loved us, but he just never provided for us.
When we come back, more of our conversation with Randy Liberty, including the story of how he went from visiting the Maine State Prison as a 7-year-old to running that prison.